Hello and welcome to this edition of Reporters, the magazine that showcases the best stories from around the world from our reporters. This week we look at the legacy of Hurricane Katrina. It's been 2 years since Katrina devastated the American city of New Orleans. Strong winds and rains triggered catastrophic flooding. Within hours, 80% of the city was underwater. More than 1,000 people lost their lives to Katrina. The others have been picking up the pieces. Of the 500,000 that once called the city home, only 200,000 have returned. Rebuilding the city will take years. Government initiatives are stifled by bureaucracy and infighting. Corruption and crime are on the rise. And, as is all too often the case, the poorest are suffering most, with many of the city's black and Hispanic population falling by the wayside. Let's take a closer look with our reporter, Claudet.
New Orleans, its legendary French Quarter, its street musicians. Tourism is picking up again, albeit slowly, 2.5 years after the city was hit by killer Hurricane Katrina. 80% of New Orleans was flooded then. Some neighborhoods still bear signs of the devastating power of Katrina, like Gentilly or the Lower Ninth Ward, a poor neighborhood mostly settled by African Americans back when no one else wanted to live in the most floodable part of the city. This trailer has been home to the Fernandez family for 6 months. Evacuated to nearby Georgia after the hurricane, they came back to New Orleans to rebuild their house. It was badly damaged by the flood. Maybelle uses a former living room to store the few belongings she was able to save. In June 2006, the federal government started a grant program to help people rebuild their homes. The Fernandez family applied a year ago and is still waiting for an answer. Today, Maybelle gets a phone call from the government, though it turns out she'll have to wait some more.
But this is the second time, we had sent we had faxed some papers before, and then he said, not that I know of, or can you give me some more so we can get started, because, before the cold weather.
That's not enough. You told me about statins.
Okay. It is very complicated because it's a lot of papers that you have to get. The Social Security card, you have to have birth certificates, you have to have a marriage license, you have to have papers for your house, all kind of insurance papers, what type of insurance that you had during the time, things like that.
40% of those eligible for a road home grant have received money so far, and Maybelle is hopeful she will too. In the meantime, she, her husband, her daughter, who's unemployed, and her grandson have to make ends meet on a $2,000 pension a month. John is furious at the local authorities, who he feels haven't done enough to help out African Americans in need, even though the mayor's black.
Nothing. He did nothing.
Yes, it did.
He didn't do nothing. All he was worried about, the French Quarter. All he wanted to do is put the French Quarter back together. The mayor, all the politicians, not just the mayor, all of them in City Hall. They didn't have the city, the people in the city at heart at all.
To find out more about New Orleans' recovery effort, we met the mayor at City Hall and stumbled upon a homeless camp right across the street.
If you ask me whether we're on schedule or not, it depends upon who you talk to. After 2 years, we've got about 70% of our residents back, and most people didn't think we would get that far. After 2 years, some thought that this city would be totally rebuilt. So from my perspective, I think we're probably on schedule, maybe a little behind because the road home money was slow to come out, and some of the federal dollars to fix our infrastructure was also slow to get here.
2/3 of New Orleans residents may have returned, but many still live in very precarious conditions. Like here, in this trailer park, a temporary refuge for those whose houses are usually beyond repair. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, opened the park 2 years ago and has now decided to shut it down.
See, I showed y'all those trailers down there with the gray tape. See, there's gray tape here, there's gray tape here, there's gray tape here.
How long do you have people to move out once the gray tape is put on their trailers?
Once the gray tape, you have at least 24 hours to get out.
Kerry Becknell is getting ready to move out. His house in the Lower Ninth Ward was completely destroyed by Katrina. He decided to rent a house away from the flood-prone areas of New Orleans. FEMA will help him out with rent until March 2008.
They're attempting to weed us off of the federal assistance. But a lot of people don't have jobs. They don't have no type of income. And, you know, it's going to be a whole lot of more people that's going to be homeless when all this takes place.
And like many homeowners who lost their property in the hurricane, Kerry says he never thought of building again.
Have decided not to rebuild down there. You know, that's where I grew up at. I was born and raised down there, but, you know, sometimes it comes where you got to change locations for the better. And that's not a place I recommend to nobody who lived in the Lower Ninth Ward to rebuild anymore. Because, I mean, the politicians are doing what they're doing, and they're not going to have that fixed in the next 20 years.
Kerry went through a first hurricane disaster when he was a child. At age 50, he's lost everything again. A few trailers down, Michael White has yet to find a roof to put over his family's head.
She said tonight, I got 24 hours.
Who said?
Marion.
Marion, who's the caseworker.
Marion, who is the caseworker. So she said I got into the night. If I wouldn't have been able to come there, they was going to take my stuff, and Lord knows where it would be at.
So have you found another house? A house?
Not yet.
Michael used to work in construction, but he lost his job after Katrina and hasn't managed to find another one since. To him, the reason is simple.
Well, just imagine I'm used to making $15 an hour, and you can get somebody to work for $4.75. Who you would hire? And that's under the table. Only thing they saying, me. That's all. Who? If I had a wagon full of work, I ain't gonna hire you because you want $15. Yeah, I'm gonna go get some Mexican myself.
Up to 20,000 Mexicans crossed the border to rebuild New Orleans, most of them illegally. And for some of those who have lost everything, except for the faith in people's goodness, there's always the church. These volunteers came from all over the United States to help fix damaged houses. Jason, a mechanical engineer, came all the way from Florida. He says he rediscovered his faith in New Orleans and was baptized in the local Lutheran church.
We have to rely on volunteers because the federal government really has not stepped in as strongly as they should have. At the same time, it gives a lot of opportunity for the volunteers to come down and actually give hope that they are not forgotten. This is the first time really I've ever experienced this in a history of our country. And the magnitude of it, I'm not sure how any government really could be totally ready for this, but it does sadden me that they have not done more.
New Orleans blacks were badly hit by Katrina because they tend to live in neighborhoods below sea level. But some white areas were not spared either. Keith Noya is as puzzled as he is angry. He has to fix his house all by himself.
Road home, although it seems to be a good idea, has some problems. There are a lot of people that received money in the very beginning, pretty much maxed out everything that was available. I've got my neighbor right across the street has a house almost identical to mine. Almost the identical payout on the insurance. He ended up getting about $140,000. I got told zero.
Later that day, he took us to the firehouse where he works. It was also pounded by the hurricane.
This, prior to the storm, this was one of the dorms for the firefighters, the operator, to sleep back in this area, along with the restroom facilities right here. They actually had kind of separate little rooms in here, and that was totally wiped out. There was anywhere from 8 to 10 feet of water right here in this vicinity.
2.5 years on, the gates haven't been repaired, nor the lockers where the firefighters store their gear.
My gear is sitting on the pump right now. If somebody was to come in and steal it overnight and we get a working fire, I don't have gear to go in. But
have you signaled this problem to the higher authorities?
They are aware. The problem is that we're trying to get repairs done to engine houses, and there's just no way that they can secure every single fire station all at once. We're on a waiting list to get some work done here, or at least the supplies to come in, and my guys will be more than happy to do some work just so we can get out of the trailer and in here.
Yes, indeed. Keith and his crew do their shifts in a trailer. These precarious living and working conditions end up affecting the psychological well-being of New Orleans residents.
There's a lot of guys that are on a job that have a different attitude towards life in general. I know of quite a few who, not on a job but off the job, I can see their alcohol consumption has gone up. I've heard of quite a few that have had marital problems, family problems, even not just on the fire department but also in the city. We make a lot of medical calls where somebody may be taking pills trying to commit suicide.
Other public facilities still have to be repaired, like this school in the Lower Ninth Ward. Children study in trailers. Until the entire city is alive and kicking again, time has come to draw the lessons from Katrina and rebuild the levee system strong enough to resist future hurricanes.
I'm increasingly confident that New Orleans in the foreseeable future would be able to resist the effects of a Katrina-like storm. The areas that breached have all been repaired to levels that were superior to before Katrina. So that's good news. The gates are in position on many of the drainage canals. They're not going to penetrate again. That's good news. The bad news is that the MRGO, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet Canal, is still open right now in terms of not being gated. So that needs to be worked on.
Another piece of good news: the U.S. Congress recently overturned a veto by President Bush against additional funds to rebuild New Orleans levees and gates. At long last, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has the money it needs to undertake the necessary repair work. By 2011, New Orleans levee system should be strong enough to withstand killer storms for at least 100 years.
Joining me in the studio now is the reporter behind that story, Sophie Claudet. Sophie, New Orleans was always synonymous with tourism, with jazz, with a certain southern mystique, but there were always problems in this city well before Katrina, but it seems that really the world only woke up to those problems when the hurricane hit.
Well, they woke up to those problems, and America did as well. A lot of Americans were not aware of the problems faced by, for example, the African-American community in New Orleans. You will well remember those very powerful footage of people like standing on their roofs, waiting to be rescued and stuff. I mean, those images obviously stuck, on everybody's minds. However, as you well said, the problems of corruption and criminality and racial segregation have long been features of New Orleans, but very few people were aware of that. And if you remember in the report, you see those church volunteers repairing some homes. These people are coming from all over the United States, and some of them were really shocked by what they saw. They were completely aware that in their own country, this kind of things were going on.
To what extent do you think that the people of New Orleans feel that the federal state has failed them?
Well, a lot of them do feel that, and you heard it in the report, even while coming back to this church volunteers. I mean, one of the characters actually says it for sure. The African-American people we've been talking to say it, and as well as the local authorities, which are known, unfortunately, in New Orleans to be quite corrupt. However, you have to be a bit careful maybe, and I certainly did, not looking at New Orleans and the recovery effort only through European lenses, as it were, or like French lenses. You know, the idea of a central state is not as strong in America and the American model as it is in Europe for a fact. So you also rest a lot of on solidarity and volunteers and so on. But for a fact, a state, well, rather churches cannot rebuild an entire city, and that's where, you know, there is a problem. So yeah, the state was slow to react, but you also have to understand that the American model is not about a very strong central state as the European model is.
It's not only the landscape of the city that obviously changed so much after Hurricane Katrina, but also the demographic, the people making up the city, with an influx of Mexicans coming into the city looking for work.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Mexicans for the time being are only in the 20,000 or something, and 200,000 people have returned to Katrina, so they're certainly not, you know, like tipping the balance or anything. However, of the 100,000 people that have not returned, most of them were African Americans. That's the real question mark. Will these people come back? Will New Orleans still be a black city, which it has been historically, with an 85% majority of African Americans, which is no longer the case? We put this question to the mayor, as a matter of fact, and he seems not to be phased out at all. I mean, the city is changing.
Sophie Claudet, thank you very much for that intriguing insight into New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, 2 years on. That's all we have time for now. More reporters next week.